In the vast, analyzed archives of the Kennedy assassination, there is a singular geometric anomaly that defies all tactical logic. A sharp, 120-degree turn onto a lonely street named Elm. Why did the Secret Service, the most elite protection detail in the world, drive the President of the United States into a dead-end trap that violated their own security protocols? Was the route through Dealey Plaza a result of innocent logistical planning, or was it a kill zone engineered by the political machine controlling Texas? Today, we are dissecting the Dogleg, the fatal turn that slowed the presidential limousine to a crawl and lined up the crosshairs of history. If you want to understand the mechanics of the ambush, you have to look at the map. Welcome to the deep investigation. If you are ready to question the official narrative, please subscribe and hit the like button to support this channel. Now, let's trace the route to the moment everything changed. To understand the assassination of John F. Kennedy, one must move beyond the personalities and look at the physics of the event. The tragedy in Dallas was not merely a matter of a shooter and a target. It was a matter of trajectory, speed, and location. The killing ground of Dealey Plaza was not an accidental stage. It was chosen. And the decision that brought the president into that specific triangulation of fire was the result of a bitter bureaucratic war fought in the weeks leading up to November 22, 1963. The controversy centers on the Motorcade route, a path through the heart of Dallas that seemed designed to maximize exposure while minimizing the ability of the Secret Service to react. At the heart of this controversy is the Dogleg, the sharp, agonizingly slow turn from Houston Street onto Elm Street. This turn is the smoking gun of the logistical conspiracy. The story of the route begins not in Dallas, but in Washington, amidst the frantic political maneuvering of the Kennedy administration. By the fall of 1963, JFK was looking toward the 1964 election with trepidation. He needed to carry Texas to win, but the Texas Democratic Party was fracturing under the weight of a vicious civil war between the liberal faction, led by Senator Ralph Yarborough, and the conservative establishment, controlled by Governor John Connally and Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson. The trip to Texas was ostensibly a non-political tour to heal these rifts, but in reality, it was a forced march into hostile territory. Dallas was the epicenter of anti-Kennedy sentiment, a city where Adlai Stevenson had been physically assaulted just a month prior, and where the atmosphere was thick with the rhetoric of right-wing extremism. The planning of the trip fell to a mix of White House advance men and local Texas political operatives. This is where the first critical decision was made, the selection of the luncheon venue. The location of the luncheon would dictate the route of the motorcade. There were two primary options on the table. The first was the Women's Building at the State Fairgrounds. The Secret Service, led by the astute advance man Jerry Bruno, preferred this location. It was secure, the route from the airport was direct and fast, and it avoided the downtown canyons where a sniper could easily hide. It was a tactical dream. The second option was the Dallas Trade Mart, a cavernous, multi-story venue located alongside the Stemmons Freeway. The Texas political machine, specifically Governor Connally, a close ally and protege of Lyndon Johnson, vehemently pushed for the Trade Mart. Their argument was one of prestige. The Trade Mart was a symbol of Dallas commerce, a place to wine and dine the wealthy donors who kept the Johnson-Connally machine greased. The Women's Building was seen as too pedestrian, not grand enough for a president. The battle over the venue was intense. Jerry Bruno argued that the Trade Mart was a security nightmare, citing its suspended catwalks that overlooked the dining area, which would be impossible to secure completely. However, the pressure from the Texas Host Committee was relentless. Kenneth O'Donnell, JFK's appointment secretary and a man who usually prioritized politics over security, eventually capitulated to Connally's demands. The Trade Mart was chosen. This decision was the first domino. Once the Trade Mart was selected, the motorcade had to traverse downtown Dallas to get from Love Field Airport to the venue. The standard route would take the president down Main Street, the principal artery of the city. This was desirable for the politicians because it maximized the crowds. Main Street ran east to west, cutting straight through the business district. It was a straight shot, a canyon of skyscrapers where the crowds could be 10 deep. But at the end of Main Street lay Dealey Plaza, the gateway to the highway system. Here lies the crux of the Dogleg mystery. To get to the Trade Mart, The motorcade needed to access the Stemmons Freeway, Interstate 35E. The entrance to the Stemmons Freeway was accessible from Dealey Plaza. If one looks at a map of Dealey Plaza in 1963, the flow of traffic on Main Street went straight through the triple underpass, the railroad bridge, and continued onto the highway. However, there was a complication. A concrete median strip separated Main Street from the specific on-ramp needed to merge north toward the Trade Mart. According to the official explanation given later by the Secret Service and the Warren Commission, it was impossible for the vehicles to turn onto the northbound Stemmons ramp directly from Main Street because of this median and the traffic flow configuration. Therefore, the route planners devised a detour. Instead of going straight through the triple underpass, the motorcade would turn right off Main Street onto Houston Street, travel 1 block north, and then make a sharp 120-degree left turn onto Elm Street. Elm Street ran parallel to Main Street and led directly down a gradual slope, past the Texas School Book Depository, and merged seamlessly onto the Stemmons Freeway ramp. This detour seemed innocuous on paper, a simple zigzag to navigate a highway interchange. But in practice, it was a tactical violation of the highest order. The Secret Service had a standing rule regarding motorcade turns. Vehicles were never to slow down to a crawl in an unsecured area. A 90-degree turn is dangerous. A 120-degree turn is potentially fatal. To navigate the turn from Houston onto Elm, the massive Lincoln Continental limousine, which was over 21 feet long and heavy with armor, though notably not a bulletproof roof, had to decelerate from its cruising speed of 25 miles per hour to approximately 11 miles per hour. It practically had to come to a stop to swing its wide chassis around the acute angle. For a sniper stationed in the high ground of the buildings looming over that specific intersection, specifically the Texas School Book Depository, this maneuver eliminated the problem of leading the target. For several seconds, the president was not a moving target. He was a stationary one, moving slowly away on a predictable axis. Who authorized this deviation? The route was finalized in secret meetings between the Secret Service advance agents, Winston Lawson and Forrest Sorrells, and the local Dallas police brass. But looming over these meetings was the influence of the host committee. The host committee was populated by men deeply loyal to LBJ. The route was published in the Dallas newspapers, the Dallas Morning News, and the Dallas Times-Herald, days before the event, including detailed maps. This publicity was ostensibly to ensure big crowds, but it also served to telegraph the president's exact location to any potential assassin. The maps clearly showed the turn onto Elm Street. The oddity of the route is further highlighted when one considers the alternatives. If the goal was simply to get to the Trade Mart, the motorcade could have stayed on Main Street, gone through the underpass, and taken a slightly more circuitous route to enter the freeway further down. Or, they could have taken a different street entirely. But the decision to route the president through Dealey Plaza, a natural amphitheater surrounded by high buildings, retaining walls, and fences, created a classic military L-shaped ambush site. The layout of the plaza meant that once the car turned onto Elm, it was flanked by the book depository on the rear right, the grassy knoll on the right, and the Daltex building on the rear direct. It was a crossfire canyon. There is a deeper layer of negligence here. Standard Secret Service protocol required the inspection of windows along the motorcade route, specifically in slow-moving zones. With the Dogleg necessitating a near stop, the buildings overlooking that turn, Houston and Elm, should have been locked down. Agents should have been on the roofs. Windows should have been sealed. Yet, the Texas School Book Depository, a private building with open access to employees and warehouses filled with boxes that could hide a gunman, was completely ignored. No agents were stationed on its roof. No agents swept the floors. It was left wide open. Winston Lawson, the lead advance agent, would later testify that he didn't check the building because it was too far back from the route, a statement that crumbles when one realizes the car passed directly under its shadow. The suspicion that falls upon Lyndon Johnson regarding this route stems from his control over the Texas political apparatus. The men pushing for the Trade Mart, the men organizing the local police cooperation, the men who printed the maps in the papers, they were part of the Johnson-Connolly ecosystem. LBJ knew Dallas. He knew the layout of the city. Is it plausible that the vice president, a man obsessed with micromanaging every detail of his political life, was unaware that the motorcade was being routed through a kill zone? Or is it possible that the dogleg was the result of a gentle nudge, a suggestion from a local official that this is the best way to the highway? A suggestion that carried the weight of the incoming administration? As the sun rose on November 22, 1963, the trap was set. The physics of the turn had been calculated. The car would have to slow down. The crowds would be thinned out in that specific section of the plaza, offering a clear line of sight. The security had been stripped away. The dogleg was not just a turn in the road. It was the turning point of the 20th century. The president was being delivered into the hands of his executioners by the very itinerary he was following. The geometry of Dealey Plaza was about to become the geometry of death. If the geometry of the dogleg turn provided the opportunity for an ambush, the dismantling of the president's security detail provided the guarantee of its success. As the motorcade departed Love Field and began its procession toward the heart of Dallas, a series of baffling command decisions began to take effect, systematically peeling away the layers of protection that usually cocooned the commander-in-chief. The trap that had been set on the map was now being baited with flesh and blood. To the casual observer lining the streets, the pageantry looked normal, but to the trained eye of a security professional, the motorcade was a rolling violation of every protocol in the Secret Service handbook. The architecture of this negligence points not to simple incompetence, but to a coordinated stand-down, orchestrated by local authorities with deep ties to the Johnson faction and the intelligence community. The first critical failure occurred before the wheels even started rolling. The weather in Dallas that morning had been gray and rainy, a dreary backdrop that initially necessitated the use of the bubble top, a clear plastic roof for the limousine. While the bubble top was not bulletproof, it was weatherproof and, crucially, it altered the optics of the interior. It created a glare, a distortion that would have made a sniper's job infinitely more difficult, particularly from a high angle like the 6th floor of the book depository. However, by mid-morning, the skies began to clear. In a decision that has been debated for decades, the order was given to remove the top. Ostensibly, this was to allow the crowds to see the president and the first lady more clearly, a political decision driven by the need to maximize the impact of the visit. But the removal of the top did more than let the sun in. It turned the limousine into an open-air basket. Simultaneously, the human shield was dismantled. Standard procedure for a presidential motorcade in a hostile environment, and Dallas was known to be hostile, called for Secret Service agents to ride on the rear running boards of the limousine, their bodies acting as physical barriers for the president. At Love Field, a chilling sequence was captured on film. Agent Henry Ribka prepared to trot alongside the limousine or step onto the rear foothold. But Emory Roberts, the agent in charge of the follow-up car and a man who would later be promoted under Lyndon Johnson, waved Ribka away. The footage shows Ribka shrugging in confusion, his arms raised as if to ask, "What are you doing?" He was ordered to fall back. This left the president's back and sides completely exposed. The box of protection was broken. The manipulation of the motorcycle escort further compounded this exposure. The Dallas Police Department, under the jurisdiction of Mayor Earl Cabell, was responsible for the motorcycle units. The original plan called for a robust phalanx of motorcycles to flank the limousine, riding alongside the rear fenders and the rear bumper. This formation effectively screens the occupants from street-level threats and obscures the view from elevated positions. However, just prior to the motorcade's departure, the order was changed. The number of motorcycles was reduced, and, most damningly, they were ordered to fall back. They were instructed not to ride forward of the rear wheels of the limousine. This created a clear, unobstructed zone of fire around the president. The motorcycles, usually the noisy, visual clutter that disrupts an assassin's concentration, were relegated to the role of a rear guard. Who controlled the Dallas police? This is where the shadow of the deep state overlaps with the Texas machine. The mayor of Dallas, Earl Cabell, was not just a local politician. He was the brother of General Charles Cabell. Charles Cabell had been the deputy director of the CIA until 1962, when John F. Kennedy fired him, along with Allen Dulles, following the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion. The Cabell family held a deep-seated, personal animosity toward the Kennedys. The fact that the brother of a fired CIA chief controlled the local police apparatus in the city where JFK was killed is a coincidence that defies statistical probability. Under Mayor Cabell's watch, the police coordination with the Secret Service became a series of lapses and omissions. The route was published, the windows were not checked, and the motorcycle shields were removed. But perhaps the most significant stand-down involved a unit that wasn't even there. The 112th Military Intelligence Group, based at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, was the standard military support unit for presidential visits in the Texas region. Their job was to provide supplementary protection, identify local threats, and secure the route. They had a dossier on dangerous individuals in Dallas. Yet, for the trip on November 22nd, the 112th was ordered to stand down. They were told their services were not needed. Colonel Maximilian Reich, the commander of the unit, would later protest that this was highly irregular. Without the 112th, the Secret Service was operating blind, relying solely on the Dallas police, the same police force that was rife with members of the Ku Klux Klan and radical right-wing organizations. As the motorcade wound its way through downtown Dallas, the atmosphere was electric. The crowds on Main Street were thick and enthusiastic, a fact that seemed to relax the agents. But as the procession approached Dealey Plaza, the texture of the event changed. The crowds thinned out. The buildings grew sparse. The motorcade was leaving the safety of the canyon and entering the kill zone. When the limousine made the right turn onto Houston Street, it was heading directly toward the Texas School Book Depository. For a brief moment, the president was facing the sniper's lair head-on. Then came the fatal Dogleg. The driver of the limousine was Secret Service agent William Greer. Greer was an experienced driver, yet his actions during the turn onto Elm Street were inexplicable. As he navigated the sharp 120-degree left turn, he slowed the massive vehicle down to a crawl, approximately 11 miles per hour. This was dangerous, but arguably necessary due to the geometry of the turn. However, once the turn was completed and the car was on the straightaway of Elm Street, heading toward the triple underpass, standard evasive driving protocol dictates that the vehicle should accelerate. Greer did not accelerate. He maintained the slow, gliding pace. When the first shot rang out, likely the missed shot that struck the pavement or the sign, the natural reaction of a protective driver is to floor the accelerator and get out of the kill zone. Greer did the opposite. The Zapruder film and witness testimony confirmed that the brake lights of the limousine came on. The car slowed down even further, almost coming to a complete stop. Greer turned his head, looking back at the president not once, but twice. For those agonizing seconds, John F. Kennedy was a stationary target in the middle of a triangulation of fire. It was only after the fatal headshot, when the damage was irreversible, that Greer finally accelerated, speeding toward Parkland Hospital. Why did Greer brake? Was he simply paralyzed by shock? Or was he following a specific instruction to wait for the signal? The interactions in the lead car and the follow-up car suggest a paralysis of command. In the vice president's car, trailing behind, the behavior was markedly different. Senator Ralph Yarborough, sitting next to LBJ, noticed that as soon as the first shot was fired, Lyndon Johnson practically dove to the floor of the car. He was shielded by a Secret Service agent, Rufus Youngblood, who vaulted over the seat to cover him. Johnson's reaction was instantaneous, a sharp contrast to the confusion ahead. Some researchers have suggested that Johnson was listening to a handheld radio, tuned into a frequency that alerted him to the unfolding events, though this remains a point of contention. What is clear is that while JFK was left exposed and vulnerable, the vice president was immediately and effectively secured. The dogleg trap was a multi-stage mechanism. The route forced the slowdown. The removal of the motorcycles and agents cleared the line of sight, and the driver's hesitation provided the necessary time for the shooters to adjust their aim. It was a perfect storm of vulnerability. The trap worked because the fail-safes had been deactivated. The redundancy that is built into presidential security, the layers of overlap between police, military, and Secret Service, had been stripped away until only a thin, fragile line remained. And on Elm Street, that line was broken. As the limousine disappeared under the triple underpass, racing toward the hospital with a dying president, the trap snapped shut. But the operation was not over. The dogleg had served its purpose, but now the narrative had to be controlled. The chaos of Dealey Plaza had to be managed, the evidence collected and sanitized, and the blame assigned. The focus would immediately shift to the Texas School Book Depository, the building that had been conveniently ignored by the advance team. But as we will see in the final chapter, the true depth of the conspiracy was not just in the shooting, but in the immediate, ruthless cover-up that began before the president's heart had even stopped beating. The ambush in Dealey Plaza lasted a mere 6 seconds, but the crime of the century did not end when the gunsmoke drifted over the grassy knoll. The Dogleg trap was merely the kinetic phase of a much larger operation, a coup d'etat that required not just the elimination of a president, but the immediate, ruthless sanitization of the evidence. As the Lincoln Continental sped toward Parkland Memorial Hospital, the mechanics of the cover-up were already grinding into gear, designed to hide the tactical reality of the ambush and replace it with the chaotic narrative of a lone nut. The geometry of the route, the stripping of the security, and the slowing of the car were facts that had to be buried under a mountain of bureaucracy and intimidation. The events that unfolded in the hour following the shooting demonstrate that the Dogleg was not an error, but a prerequisite for a plan that included the total control of the aftermath. The first and most critical piece of evidence was the limousine itself. In any standard homicide investigation, the vehicle where the victim was murdered is a sacrosanct crime scene. It holds the ballistic secrets, the angles of entry, the fragments of lead, and the spray of biological matter that dictates the direction of the fatal shot. But outside the emergency entrance of Parkland Hospital, a surreal scene played out. While doctors were frantically trying to resuscitate a man who was already gone, Secret Service agents and unknown operatives began to destroy the crime scene. A bucket brigade was formed. Agents were observed using buckets of water and sponges to wash down the interior of the limousine. They scrubbed the blood from the leather seats. They wiped the brain matter from the trunk. They cleaned the floorboards. Why? The official explanation was that they were cleaning up a gruesome mess out of respect. But forensically, this was the destruction of evidence. By washing away the debris, they eliminated the ability to map the trajectory of the bullets. If a shot had come from the front, from the grassy knoll, or the triple underpass, the spray of blood and tissue would have coated the rear of the car and the follow-up agents. By scrubbing it clean, they erased the signature of the crossfire. Furthermore, the windshield of the limousine became a focal point of contention. Witnesses at the hospital, including law enforcement officers, reported seeing a clean, through-and-through bullet hole in the windshield entering from the front. This would be absolute proof of a conspiracy, as Oswald was allegedly behind the car. That windshield was quickly removed, shipped to Washington, and replaced. The glass that eventually ended up in the National Archives showed only a crack, not a hole. The Dogleg had lined the president up for a frontal shot, and the cleanup crew ensured that the evidence of that shot vanished. The struggle for control extended to the body of the president. Under Texas state law, the murder of John F. Kennedy was a local homicide. It occurred in Dallas County, and therefore, legally, the autopsy had to be performed by the Dallas County Medical Examiner, Dr. Earl Rose. Dr. Rose was a competent, rigid pathologist who insisted on following the law. He knew that an honest autopsy performed in Dallas, away from the pressure of Washington, would reveal the true nature of the wounds, including the throat wound which the Parkland doctors had initially identified as an entry wound. This was a crisis for the conspirators. If the body remained in Texas, the lone gunman's story would collapse before it could be built. What followed was a literal physical confrontation in the hallways of Parkland Hospital. The Secret Service, guns drawn, physically blocked Dr. Rose and his staff. They forcibly seized the casket, effectively hijacking the body of the president. This was not an act of grief, it was an act of containment. They rushed the body to Air Force One, where Lyndon Johnson was waiting. This frantic haste to remove the body from the jurisdiction of civilian law enforcement and transfer it to the military control of Bethesda Naval Hospital was the final step in the trap. At Bethesda, under the watchful eye of military brass, the autopsy was botched, the notes were burned, and the brain, the ultimate evidence of the bullet's path, went missing. Back in Dallas, the narrative was being constructed. The Dogleg route, which had been the tactical enabler of the assassination, was quickly normalized by the media. The press, fed information by the FBI and the Dallas police, began to report that the turn onto Elm Street was the only way to get to the highway. They ignored the fact that the motorcade could have simply driven straight on Main Street and hopped a low curb, or taken a slightly different on-ramp. The inevitability of the route became a talking point to counter any suggestion of a setup. If the route was standard, then Oswald just got lucky. But if the route was a deviation, then Oswald was a piece of a larger puzzle. The witnesses who saw the trap spring were systematically silenced. Jean Hill, the famous lady in red, who stood just feet from the limousine, saw the car come to a near halt. She saw a shooter on the grassy knoll. Within hours, she was detained by agents who threatened her, telling her she was crazy and that she would be destroyed if she stuck to her story. She was one of many. The railroad workers on the overpass, the spectators who filmed the event. Films were confiscated, developed by the FBI, and often returned with frames missing or altered. The Zapruder film itself was suppressed from public view for over a decade, hidden because it clearly showed the backward motion of the president's head, consistent with a shot from the front, a shot made possible by the dogleg alignment. And looming over this entire tableau was Lyndon Baines Johnson. While the body was being wrestled from the Dallas coroner, LBJ was aboard Air Force One, orchestrating his ascension. The famous photograph of his swearing in, with a shell-shocked Jackie Kennedy standing beside him in her bloodstained suit, captures the transition of power. But there is a detail often missed: the wink. Congressman Albert Thomas, a key Texas ally of Johnson, was captured in a photograph winking at LBJ moments after the oath. It was a gesture of camaraderie, of shared secret knowledge, of mission accomplished. Johnson's insistence on taking the oath in Dallas, on the plane, before taking off, was legally unnecessary. He became president the moment Kennedy died. But psychologically, it was a claim of ownership. He was leaving Dallas not as a fleeing vice president, but as the conqueror. Upon his return to Washington, Johnson wasted no time in reversing Kennedy's policies. The dogleg had led to the death of a president who wanted to withdraw from Vietnam. The new president immediately signed memoranda escalating the conflict. The dogleg had removed a president who threatened the oil depletion allowance. The new president protected it. The route through Dealey Plaza was the physical path to a new geopolitical reality. In the years that followed, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, in the late 1970s would finally conclude that there was a high probability of a conspiracy. Acoustic evidence suggested a fourth shot from the grassy knoll. But by then, the trail was cold. The architects of the route, the advance men, the mayor, the governor, had moved on or passed away. The Secret Service agents who ordered the stand down were never criminally charged. The dogleg turn remained a peculiarity on a map, a jagged scar in the heart of Dallas. Today, when we look at the Zapruder film or the maps of Dealey Plaza, we are not looking at a random tragedy. We are looking at a military ambush executed in an urban environment. The dogleg trap was the result of 1,000 small betrayals. The choice of the venue, the change of the route, the removal of the bubble top, the withdrawal of the troops, the breaking of the car. It was a conspiracy of logistics. And at the center of it sat Lyndon B. Johnson, the man who had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. The man who inherited the crown because the car turned left. The sharp turn on Elm Street was not a shortcut to the highway. It was a shortcut to the White House.